Welcome back to Architectural Adventures brought to you by Historic Springfield Society. I'm your host, Kylie. Thanks for joining me as we tour Springfield's architectural curiosities. Today we're continuing our series of learning about different residential architectural styles found in historic Springfield, and we're discussing the Colonial Revival style. Behind me we have an excellent example of the Colonial Revival style. This is the circa 1901 Wilson House, which was designed by the architectural firm of Snelling and Potter of New York. The Colonial Revival style was debuted after the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition of 1876. It was popular around the same time as the Queen Anne style, and there was a great deal of overlap when the Colonial Revival style began. It was an idealization of the 19th century view of colonial-era America, and was not particularly accurate of every feature of architecture you would find during the Colonial Revival era of architecture. The reason I selected the example behind me is because it is mostly symmetrical, which is what Colonial Revival style homes are known for. However, if you look closely at the first story, you'll notice that the bay windows are slightly different and that the wraparound porch is different on either side. Typically with Colonial Revival style architecture, if you folded the house in half like a piece of paper, each side should be a mirror image of the other side. So this house isn't exactly a true Colonial Revival because it still has that pervasive Queen Anne influence that was present around the turn of the century. You'll find that many Springfield homes follow this typical typology. Details that you'll find on Colonial Revival style homes, like the ones you'll see here, up on the center dormer we have that broken pediment, which is a very common Colonial Revival element. And then we have classical features such as the fluted columns, and you'll see fluted columns that have classical capitals such as Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and composite order capitals. And then on other Colonial Revival style homes, you'll have dentil molding and modillions, which is a very large version of dentil molding that often appears under the eaves of the house. And then if we look at a 1906 postcard of this home, we'll notice that it had even more high style features such as those turned balustrades and grouped urns, which unfortunately are no longer extant on the house, but are very Colonial Revival in nature. So now that we've looked at this type of Colonial Revival house, I want to talk about some of the features you'll find on the interior of Colonial Revival homes. The interiors, interestingly enough, managed to paradoxically combine formality with comfort and making them a welcoming home. This was a departure from having unpainted stained woodwork to painted woodwork, and then you'll have features such as very deep, thick wainscoting, dentil molding, shells, swags, and ribbons, all very Colonial Revival elements. So now that we've looked at this house, I want to talk about another style that some architectural historians will argue is a different architectural style, and then some will argue belongs under the umbrella of the Colonial Revival. So now that we've looked at an example of the Colonial Revival style, behind me I have an example of what is called Neoclassical Revival style. So this style still utilizes classical design elements, however, there's a big distinction. This takes the Colonial Revival style and kicks it up a notch. You may notice that this house has very pronounced monumental Corinthian order columns. This is the main focal point of the house, and it almost gives it this false temple front-like appearance. A lot of Springfield homes have monumental columns like this. A really good example to think about when you think about Neoclassical Revival architecture of a very pure form is the White House in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining me on Architectural Adventures. We hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.